Good afternoon. Well, I certainly feel safe with all these veterans up here. I'm in good shape. But what a great day, and it's a pleasure to have you all here. And I want to begin. There's a lot of people to thank, but in a moment I'm going to be signing this legislation into law, but I want to begin by thanking each of the Assembly and Senate sponsors of this bill, as well as the committee chairs. Certainly Kevin Peterson, State Representative Peterson, a veteran in his own right, who's been a great advocate, and the author in the Assembly of this bill worked very hard on this. Thank you for Representative Peterson. And Senator Joe Liebbaum, who's been a great ally for veterans as well. Joe, thank you for your leadership. I also want to thank in the Assembly and the Senate, Representative Spanbauer as a committee chair. This committee went through, cares very much about veterans, and Senator Hopper in the state Senate was the committee chair there where the legislation went through. This bill had broad bipartisan support. It's a measure that at least components of it I talked about, I know, last year throughout the campaign, and for which many of the veterans organizations, veteran service organizations that are here today testified on behalf of it. I want to thank all the different groups that are here and organizations. We had in the committee hearing the VFW, AMVETS, you had Disabled American Veterans, the Military of the Purple Heart, even the U.S. submarine veterans of World War II testified, as well as registering in favor of the Vietnam Veterans of America and other associations, and I'm pleased that all those groups are here, as well as the American Legion. We appreciate not only your presence here today, but we appreciate your leadership in each of the various organizations, as well as your leadership on behalf of the men and women of this state who've served our country, and many that continue to serve even today. That's something I almost should have start and end with in each time. Thank you. Thank you to our veterans here, without a doubt. I had, the other day, I had the honor in this very room to speak to about a dozen of our conservation wardens who were being acknowledged for work they'd done over the last couple of years for valor or life-saving. And they, in their own right, had done an exceptional job, but I mentioned to them the reason I have this wristband on is 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately I've been to far too many of these as governor, but 2 weeks ago I was at a funeral for one of our service members who was killed in Afghanistan, Specialist Tyler R. Kreitz. And the reason I mentioned that to the wardens was because, as I do for each of those opportunities to meet with the family, in this case his parents and his siblings, I try to look a little more closely at who the individual is. And in his particular case, like many of the service members who are over in Afghanistan and Iraq right now, he decided to join the military after 9/11. In fact, he was just 22 when he was killed in action, so you can imagine he was just a kid when we saw the attacks on our country, on our own soil, back after 9/11. But he was inspired to go ahead and join the United States Army at that point because he wanted to make a difference. And he was so exceptional at that, he was recommended several times to be a part of the Special Forces, but in the end he opted not to because he wanted to do his time, serve his country, and then come back and be a conservation warden. And so I challenged those award recipients that day to say that one of the best things we can do, one of the best tributes we could do for Tyler was to make sure that they lived a little bit of their life a little bit better in memory of his service to our country and allow that dream to live on through them. The reason I tell you that is I think one of the best ways we can honor the men and women who have served, not only those with us, but particularly those who made the ultimate sacrifice, is to make sure we honor those dead by serving the living and serving them well. And so in this regard, what we're doing today hopefully is one more step forward for us better serving the veterans of this state, their families, their loved ones, in many cases for those coming back in the Guard and Reserve, supporting their employers as well, but making sure that we never forget the sacrifices made, those, the ultimate sacrifices, but as well the sacrifices of their comrades in arms who are with us today and who are with us all throughout this state. This legislation will help us do that. This legislation will help incorporate more people from more parts of the state in many different ways. In particular, one thing I talked about during the campaign was ensuring that we had members of the Veterans Board that came from every part of the state of Wisconsin. In this legislation, we go from 7 current members to 9. Of those 9, 8 of them have to be one individually from each of the congressional districts in the state of Wisconsin. That is to ensure that every part of the state of Wisconsin has representation on the board and has a voice, and then one, the last remaining spot would come from an at-large position across the state. Again, that is ensuring that we have geographical representation, as well as when we make those appointments as they come up after the terms are up over time. We want to make sure that we have representation not only in terms of geography, but from different backgrounds, from different, not only different parts of the state, but some members that board who've served in places like Vietnam or Korea or World War II, others who've served coming back more recently in Iraq and Afghanistan, so that we've got a mix of understanding all the diverse interests of veterans that we need to represent in this state. That board, again, will go from 7 to 9. The positions will be for 4 years. It will be a staggered board so that we don't have a change all at once. And the members who are currently on the board will rotate off, so it won't be a change all at once, to make sure that we continue to have stability in the Department of Veterans Affairs. The other key change is one that many of the veteran service organizations here today testified in support of, and I think former Secretary Ray Bolin gave a powerful testimony in support of, from his experience of having been a secretary in the Department of Veterans Affairs in the past, where he made the point that one of the best ways to ensure that we serve our veterans and to make sure the Department of Veterans Affairs does well is to put the head of that department on par and in collaboration with all the other department heads, all the other secretaries in state government. To ensure that when they have a seat at the table, that the leader of our veterans organization for the state is at the same table as the leaders of every other state agency. And so this makes a change in terms of the appointment of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. It ensures that the veteran that we put in that position will be appointed by the governor, not just for me, but for any governor in the future. He or she will make that appointment with the consent and confirmation of the state Senate, but will do so as defined by the statutes by ensuring that the governor meets with at least 6 of the established Wisconsin service organizations that we see here today and others like them. So at least 6 veteran service organizations the governor must consult with personally about that recommendation, then make that nomination to the state Senate for confirmation. I think the key is it's trying to put the best of both worlds so that we're ultimately accountable both to the veterans of this state as well as to the taxpayers of this state to make sure we're providing the best services possible. Consulting with the veteran service organizations ensures that we ultimately have a candidate for that office who is someone who's going to be respected and involved with our veterans community. At the same time, we ultimately put someone who is going to be in the cabinet of the governor, no matter who the governor may be in the future, so that veteran services ultimately come on par and are interconnected with whether it's workforce development, whether it's commerce, whether it's transportation or health and human services, all the different aspects of state government, all of which have a direct impact on servicing our veterans, are areas of which, with these changes, we're going to be better able to enhance. So it really is my honor today to be here with all our distinguished public servants who've served their country and who continue to serve our communities and our state by your active participation in our veteran service organizations. It's my honor to be here as your governor and to sign this into law, and it'll be my honor as we look ahead, and it's timely because now that we have an opening in the secretary position for the Department of Veterans Affairs, it gives us an opportunity to show firsthand the process that is defined through this piece of legislation, which will soon be the law, to make sure we do it in a way that collaborates with our leaders in the veterans community, not only now, but in the years to come. So it really is an honor to be here. And with that, I'm going to sign this, and then I'll take a couple questions at the tail end. get kids here who ask me why so many pins. I said, well, we got all the groups that would have a pin. You got to sign up one at a time. With that, I'll take a couple questions if the media's got them, and we appreciate you being here.
I'd be curious as to what kind of time frame do you have in mind, if any, for this new secretary?
Well, I think our hope is in the next couple of weeks if we can set up times where, again, I can personally meet with each of the organizations. My hope would be is that between the meeting and also we'd open it up so that folks that are interested could submit their name. Not only meeting with each of our veteran service organizations about the type of person, but even discussing maybe some of the names that are out there that might be interested now or might be submitting in the coming days. My hope is we wouldn't go very long, because I think we've got an interim secretary right now. As I understand, that individual is interested in being interim but not interested in being appointed as the secretary, and so that gives us just a wide open opportunity to seek out the best and the brightest for this position. But it's one we don't want to linger for too long.
People have known about this for quite a while, so it's my guess you have a short list already?
Well, we've got a number of people who've inquired, but one of my hopes is by signing this publicly today is that that'll add to the list of names. I mean, for us, obviously, I think each of the organizations here will have ideas of people that might make recommendations on, or at least names that are on the list, but we haven't narrowed it down. For us, it'll be a matter of talking about that. Again, my intention, with or without the legislation, would be, as far as appointing a new secretary, is to have the consultation of the veterans leaders you see assembled here and others from similar organizations. That's now the part of the law, and so we'll be doing that to the full extent. But there may be additional names beyond those that have already been talked about.
Is Secretary Scopus shown interest?
I would think he would be interested, but again, that's for us. It's going to be a wide open process. Certainly had a distinguished record at the department before, but I would presume there'll be a number of other eminently qualified candidates as well.
The department's been known for having quite a record of turmoil and unrest. What type of person are you looking for to address that history of conflict?
Well, I think a combination. You want a strong leader, a good manager, but you also want someone who's got clear respect of the veterans community, and someone I think that can help bring together a very diverse group of interests. And we want to make sure that for our veterans we've got a whole wave of veterans still with us, thank God, from World War II. From Korea, a significant wave of veterans from Vietnam, those even from almost 2 decades ago now in Desert Storm, all of whom have very important and significant interests and needs in terms of benefits. It's part of the reason why, for example, we made sure in this budget we put more funding in to shore up the Veterans Trust Fund. It's why making sure that not only at King and Union Grove, but looking ahead to the future, the state fulfills its commitment at Chippewa Falls in terms of veterans homes. We want to continue to have those. We also need to recognize that as men and women come back from Afghanistan and Iraq, that there's a whole nother wave of interest of people just coming back, many of times veterans who have served 2 or 3 or more deployments, who have very specific needs there as well, not just in terms of benefits, but who wear this interconnection with other state agencies, particularly for areas like workforce development. And we want to make sure that every veteran who's coming back from enduring freedom and Iraqi freedom has an opportunity to come back either to a job that they had as part of before they left in the Guard and Reserve, or if they were in active duty, they have a job to come back to in the state of Wisconsin. All those things present a whole new set of challenges. We need to have a leader that can help us address those.
Governor, off the topic of this bill, the Badger poll came out today, showed you your disapproval 9 points higher than Doyle was a year ago. What's your reaction to that?
If I governed based on polls, I'd never be the county executive. There's not a pollster alive that in 2002 would have told you I could even come close to being elected. I was elected 3 times because I think in times of crisis, what people want more than anything is leadership. They don't want Republican leadership. They don't want Democrat leadership. They want leadership. And we're going to continue to show leadership. We're going to work together. As you see here today, this is not a bill that's about me or any one member of the legislature. This is about working with our veterans leaders. And whether it's on this, whether it's working with Tony Evers, the superintendent of public instruction, on a new accountability system for schools, or working on jobs with a wide variety of people in the legislature and across the state, we're going to find ways to provide leadership.
That same poll showed 55% unhappy with the direction of the state. Why do you think so many people are unhappy?
I think right now, I think they're more than anything, they're frustrated with all the TV ads, negative ads across the board. I think a lot more people will be happy come August 10th when most of these recalls are done, because I think in general people are tired of these endless campaigns. They're tired of the campaigns going on forever. I think what they more than anything is a state government, regardless of Democrat or Republican, that's focused on jobs. We've been focused on it since day one. We continue to be focused on it. But for at least 9 of these legislative districts in the Senate side, you've got people both as candidates as well as incumbents, in many cases, who are distracted because of these campaigns. I think when we get beyond that, and we get focused back on where all 132 in the legislature need to be along with me on jobs, I think we're going to be better off. The other part is I think it's a reflection of frustration people have with the national economy. While our numbers have continued to improve here in Wisconsin, they're not at the pace we saw earlier in the year, in large part, and many of you have done stories on this, have had independent economists commenting on this, because the national economy is doing so poorly. It certainly puts a lot of additional pressure on Wisconsin. Our unemployment rate is 7.4%. The national is about 9.2%. We're much better. We're much better than many of our states in the Midwest. But still, 7.4% is woefully too high. We need to do more to correct that. And I think for a lot of people, until they start to see the economy improve, any politician, be it me, the president, anybody else out there, people are expressing their frustration with the economy when they react to many of these polls.
Today in the public hearing on redistricting, former Congressman Obey emphasized creating competitive districts contributes vitally to avoiding gridlock, that we have very partisan districts that just creates more of a divide. And the assertion was that the current plan as it exists is very partisan. You got any take on that, validity of that statement?
When I was in the legislature a decade ago, I was involved with redistricting. What the courts very clearly said at the time, the courts being arguably of the 3 branches the most objective when it comes to something like this, the courts said the partisan divide where numbers are in terms of polling at any one given moment is not as important as higher criteria. What they look at, and what I think objective observers should look at, is our community of interest held within TAC, our communities to the largest extent possible kept within given areas, people who have shared values, shared backgrounds, are they kept within those areas and not divided up? In addition, over the years the courts have historically said, is minority representation strengthened? In the past, many, many years ago in other states, gerrymandering often diffused the ability of minority candidates to be successful in legislative and congressional races. The courts have made it clear that that needs to be a priority. A decade ago when I was involved in redistricting, those were criteria we used and why those maps were ultimately largely held intact by the courts. What I'm going to look at is less the process and more the product, and say in the end, whatever maps come to me, if they meet those objective criteria of community of interest, of maximizing minority turnout and participation, and making sure overall it encourages voter participation, those are going to be the criteria. And in terms of what other components are out there, those are certainly lesser concerns to me as opposed to those others, because partisan votes shift. We see even in Assembly and Senate congressional districts, demographics change over time, but community of interest stay very similar. And so we need to keep those larger things intact to be objective.
Mr. Governor?
Yeah.
Back to why we're here.
Yeah.
With veterans, First of all, thank you very much for signing that bill, and it's an honor to be here for it. What do you envision for the future at WDVA with the direction taken? Because we know how the trust fund went downhill over the last 3 years.
Yeah, excellent question. I think for us, again, part of this is with having representation from around the state, certainly having a new secretary come in, but just in addition to that, I don't view Veteran Services as something that's solely the responsibility of the Department of Veteran Services. To me, as governor, I want to be one of the chief advocates for veterans. I want our lieutenant governor to be that. I want our legislators to be that. And I want our other cabinet secretaries to be that. I've kind of alluded to that, but when I think about workforce development, one of the exciting things is Scott Baumbach, who's the Secretary of Workforce Development, is very interested in working and saying, what can we do to make sure that we specifically target not only for veterans, but in many cases disabled veterans? How do we make sure that there are access points for jobs that we have, for jobs being created here in the state of Wisconsin? You look in other areas in what was once the Department of Regulation and Licensing, now professional or safety and professional services. We're looking at things like saying, are there ways can we make it more attractive for veterans coming into the state who need professional licenses to find a way, an easier path to coming in and finding employment in the state? When we look at other areas, again, down the line, Commerce, which is now the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, how do we make sure, again, in particular, not just veterans, but disabled veterans, not only get certification, but we aggressively move to help those veterans who have ideas for small business to start up and move forward. For us, it's about a much more inclusive concept of serving veterans than just who we put in as the next secretary, but obviously having a great champion who's a veteran and supported by the veterans community is extremely important for that. And I think having the right person, he or she, in that position will help them in this room and other rooms when we have cabinet meetings and meetings of other department agency heads coming together. They're going to know that that cabinet secretary in Veterans Affairs has the full support of the governor and is at the same table as everybody else to get the job done. Thanks for your time.